Please welcome Politico's senior political columnist and politics bureau chief, Jonathan Martin, and Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Hey, how are you? Well, hey, everybody. Grab a seat if you don't have one. Looking at you, Kevin Yoder, the pride of Johnson County. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. And Governor, thanks for joining us today. Full disclosure, the governor and I have known each other since we were both, I think, in our 20s. Yeah. Met when her dad was governor of Arkansas and exploring a run for president. And some of us have done something with our lives since then.
I like to think both of us.
So I want to start with last night, because you gave a pretty spicy speech out there last night. There's a little bit of your dad out there, right? Which is the kind of fun, was smiling, but a little bit of a blade there too. So tell me who came up with a line about your son and Jill Biden.
You'll be
What's the backstory there?
You will be proud to know that was a collaborative effort with, you nailed it, my dad.
There you go.
So I have the distinct privilege of having a dad who is a masterful communicator. I'm also married to somebody who is brilliant in messaging and strategy, and so certainly a great team effort. I have a great team on the ground as well, and work together. But for me, and ultimately, I wanted it to be something that was personal, and I felt like it was important to tell my story and no one else's. And so that's what I went out there to do, was talk about my experience and what I got to see firsthand, and communicate that in a way that was both authentic to me, but also helpful for other people to get to see a side of the president that you don't always see.
Let's stay on that topic, because obviously you did serve in the White House in the first first term of the former president, and you know him pretty well. What's a interesting, fun, compelling, or revealing story about President Trump that maybe folks in this room haven't heard before, that you think sort of tells us something about what he's actually like behind the scenes?
One of the things that I feel like the president sometimes gets credit for, but usually not, is that he has one of the best senses of humor of any person you will ever encounter. He's truly fun to be around, and you certainly see, I think, a lot of that in his speech style, is that he has this larger than life personality, but he likes to have a good time. He works really hard, but his sense of humor comes out in his day-to-day, certainly interactions. And I got to experience that a lot, and some stories I will tell in a setting like this, and some I won't. But certainly one of my favorites, and I'll try to make this the short version, I had the chance to travel with the president pretty extensively, both domestically, and I went on every foreign policy trip that the president took during my 2.5 years. And that's where I think you really get to know people, when you've been on the road doing long days, as you know, for 20 hours at a time over a 7-day stretch, away from all of the normal of life. And he was getting ready for probably one of the most historic, monumental days of his presidency, certainly up until that moment when he was getting ready to meet with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. You have two world leaders. The rhetoric had been pretty intense back and forth leading up to this moment. And, anytime you're talking about nuclear war, things get pretty serious pretty fast. And so the level of intensity was very high. You had the entire world watching, waiting to see how this was going to unfold. Many people cheering for failure, many people just tuning in because they wanted to see what would happen. But literally everyone was watching to see what would take place on the world stage. And we're getting ready to walk in. I was one of a handful of people that were going to represent the U.S. delegation on our side, and our North Korean counterparts would be on the other side. So we're literally going into a room with the world's most brutal dictator and his team that has been charged with carrying out some of these pretty awful orders. Right. And I'm looking up and down the row, and you've got Mike Pompeo, John Kelly, John Bolton, a couple of guys that are experts in North Korean and Asian affairs, and me. And it was very clear very quickly who the one that stuck out was. And so I think, for my own personal benefit, I'm going to lighten the mood a little bit and see if I can loosen things up, mostly to put myself at ease. And I turned to Mike Pompeo and I said, hey, Mike, am I the only person here who either hasn't killed someone or hasn't ordered someone to be killed? He looks at me, he looks at the room, he goes, yes, Sarah, you're the only one. I told him, I said, I saw that going a little differently. And so that sets the stage for this meeting. So I'm already pretty nervous and terrified of what's going to go down. And I'm sitting just on one side of John Kelly, the president, in the middle. And I'm taking notes and just trying to capture the moment. And we're working through a translator. And at one point, I look up as I've caught up with the translator, and I make direct eye contact with Kim Jong-un. And he gives me this kind of like little nod and a wink. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've just been marked for death. So I immediately take my chair and move it over to John Kelly, and I'm getting as close to him as possible without making a big scene, thinking if things go down,
the Marine.
I want to be next to the 4-star Marine general. Right. So like I'm moving over, and he's kind of giving me a look like, hey, can you settle down, whatever's happening over there, please make it stop. And so the day goes on, and it's a huge success, and they have this great first meeting. The president does a press conference about an hour and a half, totally on message, like we're on cloud nine, like things are going well. And the president comes off the stage, he goes, hey, Sarah, you didn't do too bad today. You want to ride back with me to Air Force One? I'm like, yes, I do. This, historic, monumental day. I'm living my best moment. Still terrified that I'm under watch by the North Koreans, though, and thinking it'll be much safer to be in the Beast with the president. So we get in the car, and he's talking, and he's like, so what'd you think of the day? And I was like, I thought it was amazing, except for this one moment. I was pretty terrified. I think I'm on, like, the watch list. And he starts laughing hysterically. And John Kelly is laughing hysterically. And I'm thinking, I'm glad that my complete and total demise is so funny to the two of you. I was like, why are you laughing? Right. And he goes, Sarah, he wasn't marking you for death. I'm pretty sure he was hitting on you.
Oh boy.
And I was like, I don't think so. And, in a way that only he can, he laughs and jokes around, and he goes, Sarah, your family's really going to miss you, but you get to be a hero to the entire country. You're going to love North Korea. And obviously joking, and at no point was he seriously considering sending me, I don't think, to North Korea, but just one of those
like Pyongyang.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
One of these totally surreal day, and yet ends in a pretty light moment. And what a way to close out that day in history.
Governor, you grew up literally in the Republican Party. Arkansas was a very Democratic state when you were a kid, and you've seen the party change, and obviously working for your dad's campaign in 2008, it's really kind of the front of the wave in terms of the realignment of the party, in terms of its orientation, both voters and increasingly policy-wise. Tell me what you think has happened to your party just in your lifetime, and how do you square it with the kind of traditional, Reaganism, small government, free trade, strong military, protect force abroad? What do you think happened, and how do you live in peace today between the kind of, the Vance wing, I guess you could say, and the more traditional kind of Reaganite wing?
Well, I think that the biggest thing and the most even maybe oversimplification for me in describing the difference of the two parties, there's a lot of nuance, and you can sit and you can debate every single issue, and you'll find, Republicans that can be divided in certain places. But when you really look at kind of the driving forces of both parties, the way that I see it, and certainly the way that I govern in the state of Arkansas, and I think most Republican conservative leaders are trying to govern from whatever position they're in, is that if you want a party that believes that individuals should make decisions about how to run their business, how to engage in their community, where and how their kids should be educated, and frankly, want the government to leave you alone for the most part, then you're a Republican. If you want the government to make those decisions and dictate the rules much more heavy-handed, then you're a Democrat. Everything else gets much more simplified when you look at it from those two lenses, but I see that to be the most clear distinction between where the two parties are now. You have one that really believes in the decision-making power of the individual, and you have one that thinks that a lot more power should be centered in the government. And for me, in the way that I'm trying to govern, that's why we focused on cutting taxes, passing universal school choice, and really trying to put power back in the hands of the people.
Now, the critique of you in Arkansas that folks...
I haven't heard any of those.
I know, it's shocking.
You're clearly reading the wrong information. So.
Exactly. I'll stop reading the Arkansas Times.
I could have told you that long ago.
So the critique of you in Arkansas is, obviously, you grew up there, you grew up literally in the mansion, but that you're more of a national-oriented figure now, and that you're kind of looking beyond the horizon of Arkansas toward a national profile. I guess my question is, do you have any interest in serving in a Trump White House in any capacity, number one? And I think the answer is no, right?
I love what I'm doing. I think I have the best job in the country, and I have 3 amazing kids that are 12, 10, and 9 that are very happy in Arkansas and to be back home. We did 2.5 years in Washington. Our family settled, and I'm very interested in serving in that capacity for the next 6.5 years.
So you want to run for re-election and serve a full second term?
I do. I've actually already announced that I'm running again, and have filed my campaign and am full steam ahead.
In 26?
Yes.
Now, I think I'm right here, but my understanding is that there's going to be an open race for president in 2028.
Your math seems correct. I know you're a writer, but your math's not bad.
So a lot of people do believe that the first female president inevitably is going to be a Republican. Do you subscribe to that school? A, would it be easier for the country to elect a woman Republican, number one? And then number two, whether it's 28 or 32 or down the road, are you at all intrigued by the idea?
I certainly hope that the first female president is a Republican, and I think there's a long list of people that are capable and could certainly take that on, and I would be excited to see that happen. I want to see every president be a Republican, whether they're male or female, so I'm pretty biased in that. Right now, frankly, the only election I'm focused on is November of this year. As soon as that's over, again, I will transition into really focusing on 2026 and getting reelected as governor in my home state. I'm really proud of the things that we've been able to do. You know, there are probably some critics that say that I focus too much on national politics, but if you look at what I'm actually spending my time doing and not just the narrative that they want to drive, my time has been focused on Arkansas. I've done more than 250 events over the last year and a half in the state of Arkansas.
How many counties?
Been to all 75 counties. And I have invested and put all of my time in terms of legislative policy on things that impact everyday Arkansans. Education being first and foremost. I made no secret during the campaign that would be my top priority. And ever since then, we have spent almost every single day working not only to pass historic, transformative education legislation in my state, but now implementing it. You can pass the best legislation in the world, but if your execution is terrible, then it doesn't matter. And so we have spent a tremendous amount of time, very singularly focused on making sure that the execution is done to the highest level so that the students in our state really start to achieve at the highest levels.
Come back to the challenge of women running for high office, because obviously the most prominent example is Hillary Clinton, but there have been a number of Republican women who have run for president and who have struggled. I mean, from Elizabeth Dole to Nikki Haley and folks in between. But where's your head on that? Like, why has it been so challenging for this country, which in so many ways has made enormous progress over the decades. Why haven't we yet cracked that?
I mean, to be fair,
Yeah.
a lot more men have run and lost for president than women.
Fair.
So, I mean, in comparison.
Sure.
But I do think our country's ready. I think that there is a great desire for a female to serve in that role, and when and who that is certainly is yet to be seen, but I think our country is ready for that and would be supportive of it.
So you obviously supported the president this time around, but not immediately out of the gates. And there was some reporting about, why hasn't Governor Huckabee endorsed? She worked for the Trump administration. What was the phone call like when you talked to President Trump and said, all right, I'm coming out for you, and you planned that event? Like, was it a little awkward or tense, or how'd that go?
No, it
Be honest.
wasn't. I have a great relationship with the president. I started working for him during the 2016 campaign and have maintained a great back and forth, and really proud to stand with him both in 16 and 20, and again.
He didn't give you a hard time at all?
And again now. I mean, I wanted to get through my first legislative session, and we spoke and planned out that event for a couple of events, or for a couple of months. And it was an amazing feeling to get to be back with a lot of the people that I had worked with in the White House, but more importantly, to support somebody that I knew could step in and lead on day one. And he has a clear and strong record of saying, here's what I'm going to do, and then going and actually getting the job done. And so for me, it wasn't a hard decision. I wanted the timing to be right, but I could not be more proud to support this president both in 16, 20, and again now. And I know he's going to win big in November, and I'm excited to help him every step of the way as he gets to the final days and takes the White House back.
This is a political junkie crowd, and this is a question for this kind of an audience, but it's widely assumed that if Trump does win, the junior senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, will take a position in the Trump cabinet. And we were talking a minute ago about Arkansas state law, which I think most folks here don't realize this, but the appointment process to fill that seat is a little different in Arkansas. Tell us about that.
So certainly a great possibility that Senator Cotton could take on a role in a Trump administration. He is incredibly smart, incredibly conservative, articulate, and I think there are so many different things based on both his business background, political, military service.
What's the best gig for him? If you could write it today, what's the best gig for Cotton?
I mean, I think he would be phenomenal in the CIA, defense. Those are places that I think he immediately steps into and can be a great voice at the table with President Trump, but ultimately that's the president's decision. He has to have a team that he's comfortable with, that he has good chemistry with. I've seen the difference when he has somebody in a role that works and doesn't, and so it's really important, and ultimately it'll come down to where he thinks someone fits best. But if that were to happen, certainly would leave a big hole in Arkansas. While we would be happy for him, sad for us, but he fills a big space on the foreign policy and national security front for our state. But the way that it works is the governor then appoints, but that person cannot run for that seat later. So it would be a max of a 2-year commitment for whoever went in to fill that spot.
Which makes it easier on you in some ways, because you don't have to choose a favorite then, because whoever you would appoint.
Oh, they still see it as picking a favorite. So I'd be happy for you to communicate that it wouldn't mean that. But, usually...
But no head start for anybody.
You make one person happy for life and a whole bunch hate you forever. So, But again, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But we love the 2 senators that we have in our home state. They are a great complement to each other, really strong leadership there, and would love the opportunity to continue serving with both of them for a long time.
You were in the White House with Trump in the first term. You saw some of those, shall we say, robust discussions on policy. What do you think it would be like if we had a Tom Cotton, who's an Uber hawk, with J.D. Vance in the sit room talking about Ukraine policy? How would that go, do you think?
I think it'd be fun to be at the table.
There you go. There you go.
And that's one of the beauties, I think, of this president is that he does, despite what a lot of the critics say, he actually enjoys a really good back and forth and difference of ideas at the table. But ultimately, he's the decision maker. He is masterful at taking in copious amounts of information, getting all of the nuances of both sides and then being the one to ultimately make a decision. And that's what you need in an executive, and he's very good at it.
Governor, what's the biggest difference between politics today and the politics that you grew up with in the 80s and 90s?
I think the biggest difference, and I don't mean this as a negative.
I don't mean ideologically. I mean,
yeah. And so I hope it doesn't come across that way. But I think the presence of the media is very different.
How so?
One, anybody who has a cell phone now considers themselves to be a journalist, whether they are or not. And so getting good, fair, accurate information to the electorate is really challenging because there's not the same level of an editorial process.
Right.
I mean, think back to when you first started as a reporter. Before you put anything into the public space, there were probably 6 or 7 people that looked at it, checked it, before it ever saw the light of day. Now, anybody with a cell phone pops out a tweet, and it can drive and make and change the news cycle in a matter of seconds, whether that's a political figure, a media figure, or just somebody who happened to catch something on a camera. And so the dynamic and the level of access has changed so dramatically, and the way that the press covers and engages has changed so much, because you can't sit back and wait on 6 people to weigh in and tell you, otherwise the story's gone and it's already changed. Now, there are certainly like longer form stories that do that, but by and large, news is driven no longer in a 24-hour cycle, but it's like a 24-second cycle. And people want to be first instead of being sometimes right. And so there's a rush to put it out. And I'm not saying, again, that's a negative thing about the press. It's just the fact of where we are now, and it has changed the dynamic so drastically.
Did you ever think when you first started working in politics that you would long for the days of the mainstream media when there were responsible reporters and editors from newspapers? Come on, fess up.
I would love for us to go back to that 100%.
There you go. You heard it here. No, but like nowadays, if you want to reach the most Arkansans, right, the most straightforward way to do that is to go on Fox News. I mean,
yes, reaching most amount of
good, bad, or otherwise,
or also, frankly, using my own social media. And so now you have the ability, and I think President Trump was one of the pioneers in doing this, is he could go straight to the people and deliver the message he wanted to the people he wanted, and do so more quickly and more effectively than sitting down for an interview. Not to say that you shouldn't still do those things, and we certainly do and engage, but if you want to get something out, we have our own channels to do that. And used to, that was not an option. The only way to get a message out was to sit down and do an interview on the morning shows or the nightly news. And they have lost that punch because now people have the ability to get access directly and in a much more unfiltered way.
But the downside being in their own chosen silos. Right. And you don't have the same shared facts that you would have had 30 years ago.
And sometimes it's not their chosen silos, but big tech has helped choose those silos. Because they push people into the places where they see what they want to see. And so it's a very large echo chamber that is not always dictated even by the person putting it out, by the people who control the algorithms and the technology.
Hey, speaking of big tech, one of the things that you did that I thought was pretty interesting was that you sent a copy of this new book that all of you have heard about, that Jonathan Haidt wrote about the role of smartphones in children. You sent that copy of that book to every governor. Why'd you do that, and what is your solution to kids and technology?
Well, and I think every state's going to be a little bit different, and hopefully this is one of the places I do think at some point the federal government may need to engage, but there's not a single piece of...
What should they do, the feds? What should they do?
Correct. And there's not hold on, I'll come to that in just a second, but there's not a single piece of data that exists that will tell you that kids having all day, every day access to smartphones and social media is a good thing. We're seeing the mental health crisis just skyrocket in this country, and a lot of it ties back to access to social media, to smartphones, the depression rates, suicide, anxiety among teens, particularly teen girls ages 12 to 17, has gone up 10 times in the last 10 years. now, and often it's compared to cigarette smoking, and I think one of the biggest differences, certainly we learned, hey, you know what, smoking in confined spaces and smoking for kids is a bad thing, so let's tell them not to do that. We now see that social media for teens and young people is not a good thing. So we've got to start raising that awareness. One of the biggest differences of those two things is that when we really were at the height of young people smoking, we had about 20% that were engaging. Now 90% of our teens are using social media. They have access to drugs, to sex trafficking, to bullying, to isolation. So it's far bigger and more compounded than that. To Politico,
right.
which, depending on what you're reading,
the most dangerous
could go
opiate of all. Yeah,
could go either way. But I'm a mom. My husband Brian and I, we have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So we are living this in real time. It's one of the biggest fights and challenges that we have.
Your 12-year-old wants a phone.
She does.
Yeah.
And it's a very unpopular opinion.
She doesn't have one.
She doesn't. And that's a big fight. And we've done, the stripped down watch that allows you to text. So you're not totally on the outside, but no internet browser and all those things, which makes us very unpopular. The glares that I got from the State of the State address that I gave in Arkansas earlier this year, the nastiest looks were from the front row of my children when I talked about how we should look at engaging on this topic.
Yeah.
And if you haven't read it yet, The Anxious Generation is a book by Jonathan Haidt, NYU professor, not political, brilliant in his ability to really break this issue down, back it up with data, and most importantly, gives a roadmap of steps that we can take that can help us start to combat this issue.
What's the one big thing Congress should do on this?
I think it has to be not a heavy-handed, top-heavy approach to begin with. I think we have to change the culture before we can just demand it. And so one, I think raising awareness and helping parents understand the dangers, but I think we should start looking at restricting access to social media without parental permission. We passed it in my state of Arkansas that you can't get a new social media account under the age of 16 without parental permission. Not saying you can't have it, just saying your parents need to know about it and say that they're okay with it. I think looking for things like that, one, it helps us raise awareness, but it also helps us limit the amount. Kids right now are spending on average 5 to 6 hours a day on social media and only about 3 to 5 minutes of outdoor play. This is a terrible thing for not just our country. You're seeing it across the world. European countries are starting to do nationwide bans on cell phones. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I do think that we need to start looking at what solutions we can implement, and we're certainly doing that on a state level.
All right, 2 final questions for you, both of which I think you'll appreciate. One is former President Clinton is famous for a lot of reasons, but that can go a lot of different places.
We'll leave that there.
Exactly. But one of the things he's famous for in Arkansas is he liked playing mentor for Arkansas governors. He has an apartment above his library in downtown Little Rock, and he, in both parties for decades now, has really tried to sort of tutor new governors. Tell us about your meeting with him after you became governor and the conversation you had. Did he have advice for you? And if so, what was that?
He and I have shared a couple phone calls since I became governor and had some great exchanges. I mentioned him and praised him in a speech that I gave on the day that I took office for his role in, as president, he and my dad opened the doors to Little Rock Central High on the 40th anniversary, where I was a high school student at the time. Certainly one of the more memorable moments of my childhood, to stand on the steps of my high school 40 years later to the day, where those same stairs and streets had been crowded with protest and the National Guard had been called in so that these 9 black students could enter the building. To that moment, you have the President of the United States, the governor, and the mayor opening the door, and those 9 students then walking in to praise and applause. Pretty monumental moment, certainly for a 15-year-old sophomore in high school. And I had the chance to talk about that. He called and we had a good exchange, reminiscing over that day and talking about the job and the role that I was taking on. And he told me to enjoy it. He said, it's a great job. You're going to love it. It's a great state, and take time to enjoy the big moments and the small moments, and have a good time with what you're doing. And offered to be available. I also have a dad who was governor for 11 years, so a really good phone a friend for advice. And he always tells me it's worth what I pay for it. But I'm very blessed to have some great people like my dad that give good advice, pretty good speech material, and very good free babysitting for our kids.
There you go. And last thing for you, the big news in Arkansas the last few months has, with all respect to you, Governor, not been about anything to do with politics. It's been about the hiring of John Calipari as the Arkansas basketball coach. I know that you met with him when he came to Fayetteville. Did he promise that he was going to deliver a national title, or at least a Final Four for the Hogs? Speaking of Bill Clinton, bringing back the Clinton era, 40 Minutes of Hell dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, we don't like to necessarily give credit to him for the basketball championships of the 90s, but certainly Coach Cal has brought tremendous amount of excitement to our state. We're gearing up for what we hope will be a great football season. Look forward to hosting LSU, mostly beating LSU. Still one of the more traumatic time periods of my life was attending a night game in Death Valley with my dad, and the LSU fans
you were sober. That was
are
the problem.
just a little rowdy, and I was with my Baptist preacher father, and so I was
You're having Diet Coke.
Certainly not on par with 99% of the crowd there, and Arkansas won. And my dad turns to me, and they were going to do a trophy presentation on the field with my dad and the governor of Louisiana, and my dad goes, as soon as it is over, we are running out of here. I was like, I don't think it's that big a deal. He goes, trust me, we are getting out of here as quickly as possible. And he wasn't wrong. I mean, they're yelling, they're booing, they're throwing stuff. It was probably one of the most aggressive crowds, and I feel like I've been up against
that's
tough crowds.
That's called Saturday in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
That's like,
I mean, they were not happy to see us, and so we got out of there pretty fast. But looking forward to a great season, both in football and basketball, and beating LSU, welcoming Texas into the SEC officially, who we also play at home this year.
Yeah.
So when I was getting ready to go to college, my dad, was very supportive of whatever I wanted to do, as long as, and he set me down and had this, you could tell he had really thought about it. He said, Sarah, we'll help you with whatever you want to do, wherever you decide to go, as long as it's not Texas or LSU. And to this day, I don't know how serious he was, but he had raised me in such a way that neither one of those were on my radar.
Never an option. Woo pig suey.
Yeah,
on that note, Governor Sarah Sanders.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
Thank you all.